Hello, good viewer. I am a critic, here in this review to look after you, to embolden your sickly spirit. Okay, I can't do that for 20 minutes. Has anyone ever told you that it's a lot harder to write jokes for a product that's good? Oh wait, did I give away my verdict again? But if you're back after watching my Yaira review, could this just be another fake out? Another gag in the seemingly endless parade of unfunny gags that attempt to bait you into staying around either through curiosity or anger?
The suspense is terrible.
Well, since my air conditioning worked all through July and I don't have a physical copy to use for a cheap joke anyway, Dan, you cheap let's jump in and find out. Biophile Kolga is drawn by... Wait, who drew this? And for that matter, who wrote it? This is the first 2 pages of the book, and this is all the text on their Indiegogo campaign page. Is anyone going to actually take credit for making this?
Where is your sane pride?
I already gave away the name Dan, so I'll end the charade and tell you that the Comics Twix account lists Dan Evans as the writer and Joshua Adams as the artist. So I guess Josh is just a machine, doing the pencils, inks, colors, and letters, everything by himself. Although I'm pretty sure that the Dan that I showed earlier isn't the same Dan that wrote this. Although I can't prove it isn't. Let's talk about consistency. This is the 3rd comic review in a row where I felt that the artwork was a bit inconsistent. However, the inconsistency here is different from what I saw in my other reviews when I brought it up. In my reviews of Alpha Core and Yaira, I mentioned how the art had very high peaks, but very low valleys. In Kolga, I feel like the artwork throughout the book is very good. It feels visceral, and violent, messy, and magical. In this sense, I think the artwork's quality is very consistent. However, sometimes the faces look very strange or off-putting, when I don't think they're supposed to be. Like, some of the faces are absolutely intentionally repulsive, don't get me wrong. I mean, just look at this handsome devil or this sexy bish. Meow. But it's no surprise that Kolga's face in particular stood out to me since she's really the protagonist of the story and the character who drives the action forward. And sometimes she looks absolutely beautiful, and other times she... doesn't.
Oh no!
So while the quality is consistently good, the faces are often inconsistent in structure. This is the same character, June, with at least 2 different noses, maybe 3 if you're not being charitable. Kolga herself goes from looking gorgeous to looking sort of like an anime character from panel to panel. The anime face, I guess I'll call it, looks pretty consistent throughout the book, give or take some sharp angles upward or downward. But the eye shape changes a lot from page to page, and you'll see larger eyes, smaller eyes, various angles, and all of them are drawn well, but it looks like different people drew different pages or panels sometimes. So while nothing here looks bad, I would suggest, with all humility as a writer with stupid fingers,
You have what my old music teacher, Mrs. Mellinger, calls stupid fingers. With hands like that, you'll be lucky to master a belt buckle.
perhaps making things a bit more visually consistent, at least with the faces, across each page, without sacrificing your style or visual flair. Don't get away from what makes you, you, as an artist. Although, as a personal request, please make beautiful Kolga the consistent canonical Kolga. I do not mind looking at this woman, let me tell you. Okay, I've spent a lot of time talking about faces, but this isn't a comic book about police lineups. The art isn't just good because of the pretty ladies, but because of the otherworldly style and mystical and magical imagery. Some of the best examples I can show you actually show off the incredibly cool, supernatural green fire that's a big part of this book's story. I mean, just look at this splash page with the ship and the fire. Gorgeous. There are little touches like having blood spattered across a page behind panels, or seeing magical energy through the eyes of characters who can perceive it, that really bring this book's personality to the surface. Stuff like this really makes the book feel distinct. And now is a really good time to talk about color. You've probably noticed by now, just from the panels and pages I've shown, that the color palette isn't quite as grim or dark as you might expect a horror comic to be. Instead, Biophile Kolga is practically fluorescent, replete with oranges, teals, greens, and purples. This is certainly a bold decision, but how well it works for you will likely vary wildly from person to person. While I didn't dislike it. It did feel a bit off kilter to me, especially with how bright the background colors can be. They feel loud and almost drown out the impact of some of the magic, like the aforementioned green fire, which should stand out as a starkly colorful aberration compared to the rest of the world. After all, it's magic, and it's supposed to be inherently abnormal, right? This leads us into another minor complaint I have while we're on the subject of art. I feel like I don't really know where we are. There aren't really any establishing shots other than this one, showing us the exterior of Kolga's house. We know action takes place in some alleys, on a dock, in a warehouse, and so on. But where are those alleys? Show me where we are. Is this a city? How large is the city? Where's Kolga's estate compared to that city? It would help to flesh out the world and help me as the reader understand where we are. Speaking of where we are, man, I am just nailing these segues right now. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the balloons and monologue placement. This is actually probably the harshest criticism I have for the artwork. Everything up to this point is something I'd like to see changed, but it's not make or break. The placement of the text, though, is something that actively worked against my enjoyment of the book.
You should just do it like a band-aid. One motion, right off!
This is one of the best examples I can provide, and it covers both the balloons and the monologue altogether. In the case of the balloons, do you see how your eye naturally goes from the panel above, down to the left, then to the right, then down again? Manga readers, please notice the illuminated exit signs located at the left, right, and rear of the auditorium. Actually, after you read the dialogue, you'll notice the correct reading order is top, then right, then left, then down. It's actually quite awkward, and several times the odd balloon placement had me rereading the text to make sure I understood it correctly. Now, Kolga's monologuing is in some ways better and in other ways worse. I never had difficulty understanding the reading order for her monologue, but the monologue is placed amidst so much stuff happening that by the time I get to her next thought, I've completely forgotten what her previous thought was. We can use this same page and the previous page to really illustrate this. We end the previous page with Kolga's thoughts, but then we have an entire legal proceeding before we read her continuing thought. These thoughts are spread amongst pages of action, enormous amounts of dialogue, and the end result is that whatever the writer is trying to communicate to the reader through Kolga's inner thoughts gets lost amongst the noise of everything else happening. However, the cult's language did look pretty cool. Ready to talk about dialogue? Yes! Like the artwork, the dialogue is generally good, but feels, dare I say, inconsistent again? Actually, inconsistent is probably the wrong word here. It'd be more accurate to say the dialogue is mismatched. I need to take a moment before continuing to say that I don't actually know with 100% certainty what the setting for Biophile Kolga is, at least as far as the time period or technology level. Actually, I know this is the dialogue section, but let's revise that. Let's make this dialogue and plot. Yeah, I'm doubling up here. Why not? It's my review. I can do what I want.
Whatever, I'll do what I want.
Anyway, as I started reading this book, my initial impression was that it felt like Bloodborne right before the night of the hunt, with just a splash of Full Metal Alchemist. I'll elaborate on that in a bit. Then I saw beeps coming from Kolga's pocket, and I had to wonder if she had a cell phone. Surely not, right? There's no way this world has cell phones or pagers, right? The title is even a bit peculiar to me. After reading the story, I can't tell you what a biophile is. Biophilia does have a dictionary definition. It's a love of life and the living world, the affinity of human beings for other life forms. But given the tone and theme of the story, I somehow doubt that this is what that word means in this instance. Or maybe it is? I don't say this as a condemnation per se, simply that what I identify as odd or out of place may not be, even if it feels like it to me. Is this good writing? Bad writing?
Bit of both.
I'm inclined to think it's bad, but then again, maybe it isn't in the scheme of the larger story Mr. Evans wants to tell.
What?
I think it's certainly worth noting that despite being unsure, I am intrigued enough that I want to keep reading. I wouldn't say that the story is being coy, but it certainly is withholding some world-building exposition. I believe this is because it doesn't want to bog you down with so much backstory that you feel overwhelmed as a reader. So, I say all of that to say this. A lot of the dialogue feels mismatched. While mostly good, certain characters feel period-locked in what I perceive to be a setting similar to our world in the 1600s, 1700s, or 1800s, making other characters sound out of place, June and Stu in particular. Use of the words nerds or wicked, for instance, really stands out as odd and jarring.
That was totally wicked!
Now, for Stu, it almost feels like his dialogue could fit. Stu is the little eye in the lantern, who reminds me of the dwarf in the flask from Full Metal Alchemist. Stu feels out of place in time. His existence is clearly different somehow as a magical or supernatural entity. Honestly, he feels like a cross between the dwarf in the flask and the genie from Aladdin, believe it or not. He is rarely serious, and he has knowledge and references which absolutely do not make sense within the story as it's presented to us in Volume 1. The setting is just so peculiar. There's clearly still governance going on, including council meetings and taxes, but there are also monsters roaming around the city streets. Is this a everything's fine during the day and then the ghoulies come out at night kind of thing? If that's the case, show me that transition, as well as how the city copes with that. Are there monster hunters? Is Kolga a monster hunter besides being an artifact hunter? Is there a police force? Do they deal with monsters? I want to take a step back to clarify something. I feel like my review right now is coming across as kind of negative.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
But to jump the gun just a bit, I want to say something now before anyone gets the wrong idea. I really like this comic.
Really?
The reason I'm asking these questions and pointing these things out is because I think Kolga has tremendous potential. But like good old JR once said, you can't pay your bills with potential.
Because you are one lousy son of a...
This is a very subjective gut feeling, but there's enough in Kolga that I found intriguing to make me want to read Volume 2.
I want some more.
However, that is only a feeling. I can't say I'm familiar with any of Mr. Evans' work before this, and I could be completely wrong. A lot is being set up for Volume 2 and beyond, and if Evans doesn't pay that off, well...
How embarrassing.
So, as a reviewer, a critic doing whatever it is I do here in my little corner of YouTube, I don't want your takeaway to be that you shouldn't give this book a chance. I feel like you should. But at the same time, I have to tell you why you may not want to if you don't have the patience or trust to see where all this setup may pay off down the line. I alluded to it earlier, but just to drive home my point, we don't find out what a biophile is. While we do find out what Kolga's motivation is for this story, we don't know what Kolga's greater motivation is for the series. We don't know what makes June special. We don't know what shadow suits actually are. We don't know the exact nature of the witch or Stu, or who or what the acolyte is.
No! None of that! Shame on you!
But the fact that all of these things are referenced in ways that drop names with hints towards a story to come gives me confidence to invest in the next issue to see what will happen. Because that's important. This issue is great, but it isn't a one-shot. Actually, let me rephrase that. This issue is great because it isn't a one-shot. If it was, then not knowing any of that stuff I just mentioned would be a huge problem. But knowing that Dan might be, should be, sowing the seeds for a nice, juicy story harvest later invests me in the book beyond this issue, which is really what you want to do when you write a comic, I think. You want to keep them coming back. It's just up to Dan to make sure that when they do come back, they get Terminator 2 or Aliens, and not The Last Jedi. Biophile Kolga has solid pacing. The story is divided into 6 chapters, so everything is neat and tidy as far as transitioning between each section of the story. Chapter 1 introduces us to Kolga and June, and shows us some of their world and what they do in it. Kolga's backstory is briefly touched on. Chapter 2 does a bit of world building, showing us aspects of the government Kolga lives under, and giving us a glimpse of Kolga and June's relationship. It ends by introducing us to villains for Chapter 3. Chapter 3 gives us more background on Stu and sets up the finale in a way that I rather enjoyed, so I won't go spoiling that here. Chapter 4 is a huge backstory dump, relatively speaking, anyway. We learn more about Kolga, her connection to the primary antagonistic force of the story, maybe even the series, and see how it seems to connect to June. Chapter 5 is an intense, brutal, action-packed finale where we see how utterly ruthless, vindictive, and sadistic Kolga can be, to a point where it even startles June. And in Chapter 6, we have our cooldown, which we bookend with a bit more of Kolga's backstory, and learn that Kolga may have more enemies than she realized throughout the story. Despite the chapter breaks, the story flows smoothly in chronological order. Flashbacks to Kolga's history are woven into the narrative, or into exposition, instead of just popping up out of the ground like Monty Mole. I don't read many indie comics that have chapter divisions in the story, but then again, this is one of the larger comics I've read, competing with Alpha Core and Yaira for page count. It makes me wonder if there was originally a plan to release the chapters as floppies, but that wouldn't really fit unless there was cut content from some of the chapters, since the page count per chapter is 12, 24, 12, 14, 21, and 7. That gave my review copy 90 pages of story, a cover, and 6 pages that are chapter breaks for 97 total pages. If that bit of speculation was the case, if it was originally conceived as 6 or so floppies, I have to give Dan or Josh, or whoever edited this, credit, because nothing feels cut. It feels cohesive, as it is, since I think the things that aren't answered are left unanswered intentionally. Of course, I'm pulling this right out of my butt. I have no idea if the book was ever intended to be floppies, or if it was always intended to be, written to be, and drawn to be a 90-page book, just as it is. So, yeah, it's paced significantly better than this transition, for instance. This is the third indie comic review I've done, and I feel like I'm starting to find my bearings as I chart these hazardous waters. When I first considered doing comic book reviews, I knew I wanted to review them a bit differently, and not just in a way that's unique for comic reviews, like using editing.
Shots fired! Kill the bald one. President!
Looking around at my peers, all of whom I consider far more talented and far more published than little old me, and seeing their various levels of success, well, let me just say it has given me perspective as a newcomer, as I watch some books fail to fund, some books just make it, and yet other books go even further beyond.
What the hell is wrong with you?
There's usually an audience for just about anything out there. I mean, there are people who enjoy this unmitigated dog shit.
I like science.
Fucking thing sucks!
The trick everyone new in indie comics is trying to learn is how to find and retain that audience. Do I know how to do this yet?
No.
But I can at least try to help an audience find the next comic they may not even know they want yet. No book is perfect, but like I said in my review of Yaira, it doesn't have to be for you to love it or have a great time reading it. So don't look at scores or stars, and instead listen to what reviewers have to say about something before you make your decision.
Listen well, brother.
I'm listening.
What I've said here, that will hopefully tell you everything you need to know about what to do with Biophile Kolga as a potential backer, or that you can reliably ignore me as a quack. With all of that in mind, I give Biophile Kolga 3.5 stars out of 5. I truly did enjoy this comic despite its flaws, enough that despite having a digital copy I've thoroughly read at this point, I backed it anyway, to support the work. I fully intend to pick up Volume 2, although I probably won't review it, since video editing still makes me feel like Rita Repulsa.
After 10,000 years, I'm free!
Biophile Kolga is funding right now on Indiegogo for about another week, and then I believe it'll be going into in demand for future orders, so hopefully this review is evergreen for Dan and Josh's sakes. Link in the description, of course. And obviously, I am a YouTuber, so I am contractually obligated to ask you to like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. And please share this video with anyone you think may enjoy it. As always, a huge thank you to my man Felipe for supporting me over on Patreon. As I said in my last review, we are fantastically close to Morningstar Chronicles #1 being available for free. We're actually finalizing the lettering now, which is so exciting. Alright, that's it for me. Follow me on X. And subscribe. And read my comic. Okay, I'm done. I'm a nap.